Shabazz is that she speaks the truth. And communication and speaking the truth are with her realities. I wish it could be so with all of us, of all of those who are so designated. So the real communicator for us, Dr. Shabazz.
I really don't know about all of that, but I'm delighted. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to be a big girl. I want to be a big girl today, and no tears. So thank you very much. Let me just say that there are a lot of people here that have been part of my life, helping me get my life back together. And as I was driving down, I really felt very bad because I had not invited my doctor who delivered my 6 babies. I had 5 pregnancies and 6 babies. And I thought, boy, you know, there was a time when every day I thought of her. And here, you know, I didn't even invite her. And I felt very bad about that because I spoke at the Brooklyn House of Detention the other day, and there were so many young men in the chapel from front to back, shoulder to shoulder. And we probably need to do a lot of recruiting for students there. They are in desperate need of our help. And so many of them are there for drugs. And one of the things I said was there was a time in my life when I was very troubled. And I was pregnant, 3 months pregnant when Malcom was assassinated with the twins. And I said to my doctor, give me something to make me forget, because every time I would attempt to go to sleep, I'd see my husband falling. And I had thrown my children under the seat and shielded them with my body, and every time I attempted to go to sleep, I would see him falling. I said, give me something to make me forget. And my doctor was very wise. She said to me, call me tomorrow morning. And I put the phone number by the phone and some other places just in case one of the children removed that. And I would call in the morning. She would say, call me at lunchtime. Then at lunchtime, she said, call me at dinner because I'm having a meeting now and I can't talk. Are you all right? Can you hold on until dinner? And I said, yes. And then at dinner, she had to feed her children because she'd been away from them all day long, and called me tomorrow morning and call me at such and such a time so that we can have an opportunity to talk. I need to talk to you. There's some things I want to discuss with you. And then call me at lunchtime, and call me at dinner, and call me in the morning, and call me, you know. And then all of a sudden, I said, hey, who does she think I am? You know, which meant that I was, you know, really getting better. And I prayed that I would be able to live with it. And I'm telling you that I have been able to live with it. And where's my aunt? She wouldn't come up here and sit. And my daughter, Ilyasa's car was stolen. That's why she wasn't here earlier. Ilyasa, come. Come here. This is Ilyasa. How are you? Okay. Ilyasa was 2.5. And I probably, at this point, she thinks I was a bad mother. I never explained death to her. And her father would always come home at night, and I would make homemade cookies, and he would put the cookie jar on the one arm. The baby, who was Yasa, would hold the quart of milk and 2 plastic containers because she broke every glass we had. And they would watch the news. And I never really explained to her about death, so that she would always wake up at night the same time and look out the window, and her father never came. And so she would kick the door and kick the couch and stomp back in the room, so that I start putting a little, cover the bottom of a cup with some milk and break a cookie in half and put it near the door. So she got very happy. She would eat her cookies, drink her milk, and go to bed. And I think she learned about death when our bird died. So she was 2.5. I understand she's still kicking the door. And stomping, but at least we got through it. And I'd like for you to meet one of the twins. Malak, where are you? Come here. Come here. She is one of the twins born 6 months after the assassination of my husband. And she thinks she's a big girl. Okay, sit. You would never really know that none of my children didn't see their father, because we all talked about him and told tales about him. And the twins, when they grew up in the same fashion, they would tell the same stories that they'd heard their sister or myself repeat. And we had a woman when I first moved to Mount Vernon who came into the house, and she says, listen, I can't work in this house. Everywhere I go, you got a picture of this man in here. Who is he, And it was a picture, of course, of Malcom. But we had grown. We didn't know that it was not the proper thing to do, because there was a time when we could not look at a picture of him. And we had progressed to the state that we now could look at a picture of him. Not only that, we had it in every room in the house. We have come a long way. Let me just tell you that Malcom, I always say that Malcom was the most important happening in my life. And my mother really don't like that. We were Methodists, AME Methodists. My father had a business that my mother ran, and he was always tired. My mother graduated from Alabama State Normals Teachers College before it became Alabama State. My father graduated from Tuskegee, and I was not a boy, obviously, but I had to go to Tuskegee. And I went there for 2.5 years. Then I came to New York and went to nursing school, and I met Malcolm X. He was the most important thing in my life. One of the first things was my parents refused to acknowledge the conflict of discrimination in the South. They somehow thought maybe I had done something to perpetuate it or encourage it, or whatever. I know now that that was fear, and they really didn't want to deal with it, or didn't know how to deal with it. Malcolm X was the first person that I met that dealt with it, because I thought maybe it was something wrong with me. He says, racism, sister, don't you know that? I wasn't ready for it like that, but And I talked to him, and my interpersonal strengths were strengthened by him, and wherever I am, and try to teach my children that wherever they are, they belong. I don't care where they are, they belong, because they are earthlings. They're part of the human family. So that I am grateful for Malcolm. And a lot of people still in 1988, Dr. Turner, can't deal with it. They said that Malcolm was a reversed racist. What is that? That he hated white people, you know. He didn't hate white people, he might have disliked the behavior of some, so that all he did was hold the mirror up, and he was criticized. And I would like one day that, but let me just tell you that this is one of the things at the various colleges and universities that I say to people in terms of Malcolm being in prison, that this society really will not permit someone making a mistake. But we have to be very cognizant of not only what our children do and what we expose them to, but the kind of adults we allow to be around our children. And Malcolm used to say that people will spoil your children and then be the first ones to criticize. We're talking about a young man a little after his 16th birthday, and not past. He was not 19, okay? So we're talking about roughly 3 years. And the adults who taught this group of black boys how to do what they were doing out there in the street are still walking around free, okay? So that he went to prison as a teenager, actually. And for the rest of his life, and I guess rest of mine and all of his descendants, they'll have to pay, you know, and explain that.
Well, I'm asking the question, though, because what we're trying to do is learn from your experiences in your life. And the thing is that so much of I have a huge population of males who are moving through the prison system, and theoretically they form the basis of a large number of fathers out here and other potential leaders of our community. Theoretically today still we have a very serious problem with drugs in our community and people who either use them or sell them or exist in the world around all of that. And I guess the choice that so many of us have made about that is to sort of just shun all of that and turn our backs on it and deal with people as, you have committed these following sins, and besides, you live on the outskirts of everything. And you're also dealing with a person who, obviously at the time you met him, was dealing with something that he believed in very strongly, a religious faith that was controversial to other people. It was a very difficult existence to deal with. And I'm just trying to get an understanding of how you equipped yourself to deal with these things in such a way that we can understand how we need to equip ourselves to deal with what is reality. There are probably some people who have just as much to offer their community as Malcolm X did.
He could ever do any wrong. I mean, that was the state that I found him in. He was highly disciplined and believed in what he was doing. He was goal-oriented. One of the things is that I actually was delighted to tell my parents about him. It was not until my parents really knew that I was serious about him that they totally fell apart. I don't mean they were upset. They totally fell apart. I think the world has grown since then. We do live in a pluralistic society. To accept difference, we complain that white and blacks live in conflict, but then within various ethnic groups, if one member becomes this or that or the other, there is conflict. So that they felt, number one, he was too old for me. Number two, that...
What was the age difference?
Well, I'm not going to say at this point.
All right.
that he was too old for me, number one.
Enough
That I didn't have the kind of experience to deal with a man at that age. You know, they didn't really know I had lived away from home other than vacation. You know, summers, Thanksgiving, Christmas kind of thing. Number two, he obviously had different values and religious upbringing than I, and therefore they knew best. And of course, I felt that we needed to talk about it some more, and they didn't find it necessary to discuss. And they felt that they had reared me to do better. And I couldn't understand that. So that not only did my parents talk to me, but the minister was asked to talk to me, and, you know, a whole slew of folks.
When you look back on that, obviously, if they had been able to convince you, the country in some meaningful respects, but do you know, so many parents today believe that they shouldn't be involved like that.
I think they should. I think they should. After all, I thought they were doing best. I think parents have to do what they feel is best for their children. Parents have that right. You know, I don't know where children come off that their parents don't have the right to intervene in their lives. Some of us feel that parents should not intervene unless we are in trouble. Parents should intervene all of the time, in peacetime as well as in crisis.
In terms of her community work, also we've been reviewing some of her early years of life as a young adult, and her meeting and encounter with and subsequent marriage to one of the dramatic figures of our time, El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X. Dr. Shabazz, I'd like to take for a moment this issue of parenting, because it's something that obviously concerns a lot of us. And in our community today, we have a situation where well over half of our households, African-American households, are headed by single women. Was immediately and abruptly handed what anybody would consider to be an absolutely incredible burden. If you know, I don't like using that term when we're talking about children and human lives, but obviously, as a young mother, to suddenly be without a husband and with 6 children is a dramatic.
4 children.
Well, 4, and you had one just shortly after.
2. 6 months later.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's an amazing situation. How, if anybody, could possibly be prepared in life for that? What are the things that you consider now, today, that gave you the ability to deal with that? I'd like you to break that down for us, emotionally, spiritually, in terms of friends, support. What are the pros and cons?
Well, I think basically my parents, because I had a happy childhood, paid per hour. They charged me a flat fee for 6 children for 2 evenings a week to go to school, you know, because I went to school in the evenings. So that it was not easy. I don't mean to say that it was easy, but one of the things is I think that one should always look on the positive side. Sometimes you have friends, or at times yourself, you become pessimistic or doubting. Your mental framework or your conceptual framework must be totally positive. And when people throw blocks at you that you cannot do this or you have too many children, you know, you must then develop objectives to get around that. But you have to always remain positive. And so I would decide what it was that I wanted to do and develop a strategy to get it done. And people would say it's too difficult, you need your rest, you need but also I needed to get over that.
how did that impact upon your being a parent? And I ask that in a rather broad way. Obviously, with 4 children and 2 about to come, in any case, you were, you know, an extraordinary parent. Not many people have families that large to begin with. But you also had not only a husband, but you had a community that was actively, theoretically, supporting his work. For a time, you had, you know, I would assume a very strong religious community and other things around you, and everything. Without all of that, you know, fringe element around you, how did that suddenly change your perceptions of how you were dealing with your children?
I had some supporters, and then I had some people who felt that it is like babies. They don't vote, so you know you can look over them. So that I have some people who didn't do who now want to do. Mm-hmm. I have some people that I was cut off from, and at this point want to be reconnected, and there is no history, so that there's no reason to be connected. Mm-hmm. But there were always some friends. There was always people that I could call upon in this country and outside of this country. And I might say that of different ethnic groups, as a matter of fact, some of these ethnic groups in the world society don't get along, but came to my rescue and my help, so that I did have a platform. And it was very difficult, so that I had to always be focused. I had to always remember my agenda. And if something didn't fit, I had to drop it. You know, there was only 24 hours a day. And there were 6 little girls who only wanted mommy to bathe them, only wanted mommy to feed them, wouldn't eat it if mommy didn't cook it. I mean, so that, or my mommy don't do it this way, or she don't know how to do this, or I will not go out to play because my mommy comes out to play with me. I mean, it was, oh God, it was.
You had to do 6 heads of hair.
Well, which was okay. You know, I didn't mind doing that, but it was that and the this and the this and the this. You know, so that I got through it. Mentally intact, hopefully, and I don't advise it, but it can be done. Remember, I had a happy childhood myself, so that we learned by comparison, at least I do, so that I was able to make some comparison. I'm not saying that it was a jolly good time, because it was not. It was just very difficult, but I had to be totally sane. I could not be drugged and do it. I could not drink alcohol. Alcohol is a drug, and do it. You know, I had to be clear-headed. I had to eat yogurt and drink tea, you know, and deal with every day. And if I did that, if I had gone in any other direction and got off track for a few hours, I would have been totally in trouble.
Obviously, in your life, as you travel around today, even at the college that you're at, where you have a lot of single mothers and other people, you know, not your garden variety 17 and 18-year-old college student. You obviously have had a lot of time to reflect on this concept of single motherhood and watching other young women face this challenge, and young men, and how the support structures exist or don't exist around them. What's your speech on that? How do you feel about
you know, fights with people who would say, you know, well, you know, you don't have a father, so, you know, you're in bad shape, or, I didn't want that kind of mental framework developing, that you're a person and there are people that love you and you can do, okay. But at the college where I'm working, they have a women's center, and at a variety of colleges around the country, they have centers for women's development, and we have one at Medgar College that is run by a young woman, Professor Sophia Bandelli, and she has been on the program here. And the kinds of things that are available to women through centers like that is just remarkable. And I always say that I feel cheated that when I was raising my children, that I did not have that kind of resource available to me, that I didn't have to sit down and try to figure out, where and when and how, So that I think the young women who are coming along now have those kinds of supports for them. But it was not easy, but it was made less difficult by the kinds of friends that I had at that time and who supported. For instance, if I decided that male influence was extremely necessary for my children, then, you can have a godfather, okay? And so that they all have godfathers that call, that do, and they would get dressed up and go out and come back with loads of packages, and everybody would say, why didn't you get so-and-so to be my godfather too? They would have these conversations. So that whatever is not part of the total structure of the child, you can bring it in. Children have to have certain experiences, and that's what I attempted to do. I was not always successful, but that was what I attempted to do. And according to what went on in my neighborhood with two-parent families, or families that were reared by grandparents, children that were reared by grandparents, my children didn't suffer that much.
What is exposed to any of the rest of us, to the books, the discussions, the listening to the radio today, people who didn't even have any concept of that time, talking off the top of their head.
Well, one is that I try to say to them that you have to understand that people on a whole was very limited. That we live in a world, and there are a number of concerns, and these concerns will not be solved, although they are solvable because of the character of the people. And that their father was a man who attempted to solve some of the problems that exist in this world. And that they have to always remember, even if they are teenagers, that they cannot be influenced by people of influence to do wrong as their father was. So that my husband has to always carry that bag, rather than the person who was in an affluent position, who was able to cover his deeds, but my husband could not. So that for 3 years, their father is being defined and criticized, and people don't see the fact that he changed the course of the world for the African diaspora, that other leaders were brought forth and supported, that whatever good we can do, we must do that, but we cannot negate our people and help other people. So that, they basically understand that.
I think that they might have a problem with, and you might have a problem with, talking about dedicating one's life to public service.
Absolutely, absolutely, because people really don't want to hear it. Number one, education, and I would imagine my children and other youngsters who are my children's age will do the same. But we have to constantly put in front of them concepts like peak efficiency. You know, you can do it. Go on and work at it. Potential. We have to have that structure there. We have to have some alternatives there. We have to have high expectations of our children, whether they reach it or not. You know, if they flounder at 0 and 1 and 2 and 3, we still must expose them to the 10s. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that, and basically, that's what my mother was doing. She was saying that, you know, our expectations of you are higher, you know, although I find in retrospect, they had limited vision, but still they had high expectations of me. And we have to expect that. Sometimes we don't think our children are going to be anything, you know, so that we don't create that aura, you know, so that we must create the aura. We must make sure that the environment, that in the environment that our children are growing in, have supports that will help them reach these levels of high expectation or peak efficiency, or working towards that potential.
But you know how so many people deal with that question today. They say, well, every child is an individual and they're their own person, and you should let them be their own person. And the worst thing you'd want in the minds of some enlightened parents today is to have, you know, 6 little Malcolm X's or 6 little Dr. Betty Shabazz's.
Look what happens when there is a tornado and something go beyond the bounds. There's always a crisis. So that what one wants to do is not put anyone in a straitjacket, but when you're talking about living a life of quality, you know, you can do anything to extreme. We know that moderation in living, eating, you know, even just eating, you know. I mean, I could go hog wild and off time do. God forbid if I did that with something else. So that we have to be able to control something sometime. And you see, what happens with that philosophy is that people who don't want any control, you know, they don't want anyone to tell them anything, and, you know, they want to do it if they feel like it, and if they don't, you know, but you always have those people in society who are dealing with structure and who always rise.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose, you know, using your analogy about the hurricane, were you not to have the structure that you took some time describing to us
I would have
before,
been taken away with a wave. just blown away with a wave or a good wind. You have to be grounded.
How important, we've been talking about structure for a moment, but in the mosque and later through life with a very devout man and all of that, and that is a question of discipline. You talk about control, but there's almost an added factor of discipline. There's something that, while we seem to, in our churches and our religious institutions, be able to come up with control. We're able to tell people, you go through this door and this will happen, and you do this and this may happen, and so, you know, there's almost like a fear structure built in. There's also the question of discipline. Obviously, you had, you know, just even on something as superficial as logistics, I mean, just to move 6 children around was a discipline, would have had to be a disciplined exercise.
And sacrifice.
And sacrifice. I mean, how have you had to discipline yourself and your mind in terms of walking that line? And I've seen you in so many occasions over those years. You never got into that. That obviously took a great deal of discipline, personal discipline that you demand of your children. How do you build that up?
Well, I had an agenda that faced me every day. Okay. And there were certain things that I could do. There were other things that I would like to do that I didn't have the time or the resources to do. And I understood that. I mean, I was very reality-based. And that was basically, I got that from Malcolm. I was reality-based. I think I used to fantasize a lot, but, and I could do that, and there was nothing wrong with fantasizing a lot before I met Malcolm. But after meeting Malcolm and dealing with that whole issue of discrimination and racism, you know, and that was one of the things really that brought us together, because my parents refused to deal with my own questions to them about racism, about discrimination, and about what was happening to me in a Southern school. They really didn't want to hear about it. As a matter of fact, they behaved as if I had created this. And when I met Malcolm, and I knew that I did not, or I was not suffering from a psychosis, that this not only had happened to me and my own colleagues at college, but it was a whole world situation. And so that he helped me deal with that. And what I later learned, and of course I loved my parents, but they didn't want to deal with it because they were really afraid. They were afraid and embarrassed. And you would hear people say, even you can hear people saying today, I don't want to deal with that black stuff. I mean, if black people didn't drink and worked every day, this wouldn't happen. Do you know what I'm saying? So that Malcolm helped me mentally. I was stronger with him, and I began to face reality. And I think that's basically was one of the ingredients for my own survival. That I didn't like it because my husband was not with me, that he was dead. But I had the children, and I could not go on a round-the-world trip, like a lot of my friends were saying, you need in order to face this to go on a round-the-world trip. But if we went on a round-the-world trip, then, you know, I mean, that costs a lot of money, and it could go farther if I did some other reality-based things with it. And, of course, my mother was upset because she said, you were not reared to take care of yourself, let alone 4 children, and now you're pregnant. And you see, this was part of her thing about, I told you not to marry this man kind of situation. So that, you know, I had, number one, to prove to my mother that I could take care of my family. Number 2, I could not go home and have my face washed every single day, you know. And then when I did go home to visit, my mother took over the children, and I was less than whatever, but she was totally in charge of all of us, you know, so that, you know, I had to, number one, stop crying and deal with the situation. And I think all of us have the ability. I don't have any special ability. We all have the ability to do it. I perhaps was in an environment that conditioned me to be able to do it and not get involved in the abuses. And basically, I guess I must thank my doctor, Dr. Josephine English, who still is in Brooklyn, who, but for the grace of God, I could have been a drug abuser today, who dealt with me day in, day out, until I thought, you know, what on earth is she trying to do? I called her in the morning, I found her at lunchtime, I called her at night, and it was always call me, if I called in the morning, call me at lunchtime. If I called at lunchtime, she couldn't talk. She was more than likely in the operating room or in some meeting. Called me at dinner, and at dinner she was always getting dinner for her children. Called me first thing in the morning, and so it went on like that until I got to the point that I said, "What is she trying to do to me?" So that I was getting better and didn't know it, and so that I had a lot of support in different ways. Juanita Portier, and I saw Pam the other day, her daughter, at the Robeson's affair, and she's all grown up and a big lady, but when I would go to Juanita's house, she would always follow me around. And her mother and I wanted to talk about this and that and the other, and she would say to Pam, "Pam, why don't you go and play?" And she says, "I'm going to stay with my guest." She said, and I was, of course, her guest. So that, we do move on. And we have to be open to all of the support. Sometimes it can come from a poem or a letter or a phone call or a visit or
maybe the same ones that were telling you about the round the world trip part. You probably had a lot of friends advising you to, write a few memoirs that might take you about 20 years, do a few speeches, become a traveling goodwill ambassador for something or other, and be brought in on some people's shoulders a few times a year at a ceremony, and
they have to have some strong shoulders.
Just say wrap yourself in some organization, in some church, in something or other. Let us use you and hold on to you and put you out and roll you out for a few occasions. Bachelor's of Arts, a Master of Arts from Jersey City State College in Public Health Education Administration. And then following that, a PhD in Education from the University of Massachusetts. Wouldn't it have been simpler to sit in some mosque somewhere, or sit on a big royal throne and be the Queen Mother Guru of all of Black thought, as though you could be in that position? I'm sure people suggested that to you, and wouldn't that have been a lot easier than doing these other things? What was the motivation?
I wanted to be in control of myself. I wanted to be able to make decisions that were best for me. I was offered asylum in about 15 countries. The only thing is that I would have to leave my parents, and I would not have the kind of support for my children. And I wondered about that for a number of years, if I had made the right decision to stay in this country. And I stayed in this country primarily because of logistics, and my parents were here and everything I knew. And I figured that if there were any difficulties, I would at least know how to make a living here. That was not a language problem. And
But you were
3 of the countries had coups, so that I knew I'd made the proper mistake. You can try in the middle of the night to flee. You can't do that with 6 children. I mean, who do you leave behind? I mean, you want to save everybody, So that I always tried to deal with reality, and I always talk to myself. I didn't hallucinate, but I would go by myself and attempt to think things out.
Well, I mean, it's not as though, and even though your official resume doesn't necessarily reflect it, it's not as though you, just said, I'm going to drop my pails and my buckets here in America, and that's it. I mean, you have traveled extensively throughout Africa, repeatedly, the peoples of these regions and parts of the world. you're probably one of the most traveled professional women, African Americans that I know. So with that in mind, obviously you're not nervous about being on the world scene. But there must have been something else practical about desiring to stay and to go into areas. I mean, you probably could have very easily gotten a few degrees in political science or black studies or something hung around your shoulders, honorary or something like that, without struggling too hard. I mean, why go into areas relating to public health, education, administration, all of these other kinds of things? You got your PhD.
Well, I didn't want anyone to take it from me, by comparison. And so that I felt it was what I should do and what I had to do.
I'm sure there are people, though, well-meaning people, friends of yours, people who, have been supporters of yours. You had the privilege and opportunity of being married to a tremendous figure in our history, and you know him better than anyone else. You know all of the things he might have thought about this, that, or the other thing.
It's true.
You have a responsibility to kind of be, to carry on that image, that work, to be a surrogate. Now, obviously, you have not disguised the fact that you're a widow, Malcolm X. But you've also developed a very serious professional life for yourself in a field having nothing to do with the specifics of, either his religious or his social or political philosophy.
It was necessary. I think it was before I married Malcolm, so it was easier for me. But it does not mean that I have not done work in relationship to the African diaspora, because I have. As a matter of fact, when it really has been interwoven. When I was writing my dissertation, my topic was the OAU, its role in education. My population was the OAU ministers.
The Organization of African Unity.
Yes, so that I went, my population was meeting in Ethiopia. And for chapters 3 and the first part of 4, I went to Ethiopia during the time of the supposed war in Eritrea. Met Clarence Jones at the airport in Rome. I have really kind of integrated. When you start talking about health, although the American system deals with the germ theory, you have to take into consideration the health habits of people around the world, because we live in a pluralistic society.
But
I have not been an evangelist,
right.
You see. No, I have not been an evangelist. I feel that Malcolm loved himself, loved the African diaspora, loved his people, understood that if other ethnic groups could come through, so could the African diaspora, that they are treated the same way all over the world, not just in the United States, and that there could be some significant change. I believe that, but I don't have the driving force that Malcolm had to change this, particularly when if you are going to make sure this happens, you have to be willing to even fight your own people, whose very livelihood depends on keeping things as they are. And basically that's why we are still in the condition that we're in, because a great number of our people support things as they are. And it is not that I don't believe as strongly, it is, can I go up against all of that? And that's mammoth.
part of that attitude, though, has to have been shaped. I'm sure you've had to deal with the dynamic of having all of the throngs and supporters and the people who were adulating, adoring your husband, and at the same time, once he was assassinated, a lot of that, just went away, went by the wayside. I'm sure that had to have an impact on you and how you saw, a commitment to a mission, because obviously, as you said, he was about a particular program and an agenda, and there were a number of people who were supposedly committed to the same agenda, and I'm sure you probably know that list better than many of them would even care to remember, care to have you remember and point out for us publicly. The reality of it is that a lot of people took a message from his assassination to sort of, get out of sight, and a lot of that had to do with, how you ended up being dealt with, I suppose, over the years. Do you have any reflections, any concerns, any thoughts about how we as a people need to react to the concept of change and development of our community? People didn't. A lot of people gave up. A lot of people said, oh, boy, this is heavy. And I'm sure you see them, even to this very day, off doing absolutely nothing or
still in a heavy situation.
Still in a heavy situation. What does this whole thing, offer as a lesson for us about what we need to do the next time, or what we need to be about our lives today?
Let me just say that one thing is that I could not be where I am without help and support. Okay, I just choose not to identify them at this point. I didn't do it all by myself, and I had a lot of encouragement. And there were times when I felt that I just couldn't take another breath or go another step, and there were people there for me. One of the things is that you mentioned about change, and I think change must first come from within. Change must, the host, the person, must feel that they want to change. And of course there were a lot of people who felt that I really should actively take over and do all of these things, but they were not really willing to help or support. I was just supposed to do this, to wave a wand and do this, and I could not do that. I think I work well with people, and I could not get out there and be the kind of mother leader, and that if people wanted to do, they have the energy, and when all of this energy is combined, that they want. And I know that there have been a lot of critics who felt that I should have done more, but other people should have done more. And I think that, and this is one of the things I tell single mothers across this country, that if I did it, I am not a super person, I have common capacity and abilities, and they can do it themselves. So that change must first begin with the individual. But a lot of people want to change and don't have the dynamics or the structural ingredient for change, and then they must seek advice. And whatever it is that people want to do, they can do it. That whole wide world is open. We as a people have more resources than any combination of ethnic groups, but we do less with it. We can find someone on the globe who lives in water on stilts in a little box, not even knowing the language, that can come to America and get all of the top awards from our institutions of higher learning. And here we sit. So that change must come from within. There is help all around us. We need to reach out. We want people to help us, and then to reach in, we must reach out. And that was all I did.
Again.
Absolutely educational level achieved, or their economic whatever, that when we look out at the globe that we live on called Earth, and understand that there are different ethnic groups and every kind of difference that exist, that all people have a right to develop to their highest potential. And it is within us to reach out and move to that level. I am delighted to have been associated with Malcom on a very personal level, that opened my own eyes to this, and feel that it is no sin or crime to reach that apex of living. That's what all people must do. He decided that what he would do was to fight for the human rights of the African diaspora. And a lot of people call that separatism. It was not. He said every other leader had fought for the human rights of all people, and the African diaspora had always been lost. And he would do that. I think when we talk about change, we have to criticize first ourselves for not moving up and out. We have to understand, and this was one of the things that he was very cognizant to show me pictures of informers who look like us, who would be in the midst. Even informers over the years who had followed him so long, they said, you know, I admire you. You're doing what every black man should do. I'm sorry I don't have the strength to do it, but this is my living. I'm being paid to do this. We have to recognize that they are enemies in all camps. We can understand from history what has happened to us during the slave trade and coming over here and the part whites have played. We also must understand, in order to get us back in that condition, we've been socialized to embrace all black people, but that some black people might lead us back to that. What can we do to not to repeat history is to be totally cognizant of those facts. And we know intuitively, we don't have to have college degrees when people don't mean us any good. People have gotten into us and have learned our secrets. And we want so badly sometimes to belong that we just tell them all of it, you know. We have to recognize that we are where we are because obviously this is where we want to be. And we are constantly waiting for a Messiah to come to do it for us. And then we criticize the Messiah when we notice that they have weaknesses. You know, it takes all of us, or a great number of us, working towards a common goal. No Messiah will wave a wand and conditions will be better. We are where we are because obviously we have not done something. We have not been cursed. We know that people have been abused for as long as people have been abused, and not just black people. So we need to mentally get beyond that, and then physically move in the directions. We belong to all religions, all political parties. our educational and social standing is varied. So there are a lot of diversity, you know. But I went to a political gathering, and there was some people there who were saying, you know, we can't allow these black people to do this. You know, what is this? I mean, you know, this might be your job to keep me down, but I don't have to succumb to that. We have to continually to work and to move and to understand that we are a diverse people.
And the system also, as I gathered from your comment earlier, respects people who are true to those concepts, even though they may write some nasty things in the newspaper, but they respect. You're respected today.
But people might not agree to Malcolm, but in the final analysis, they're going to have to meet that door. They're going to have to walk through there. You know, you can only keep up a facade for so long. Do you know? We're going to have to walk through the door. And all you have to do is to examine history and to see that we have been on course and taken off course. I mean, this is the perpetual mythology for us. So I appreciate the respect, but in the final analysis, where are we?
Okay.